The pump room at Bath filled itself differently in autumn. In summer it was all gauze and ambition, mothers navigating their daughters toward the mineral water like ships toward a port they could not quite name. In autumn it was the convalescent, the retired, and the quietly finished, and the light through the tall windows arrived at a lower angle and did not flatter anyone in particular. Cecily Marsden had come to prefer it this way. She was standing near the window that overlooked the Abbey when she heard the room shift. Not a sound, precisely, but a change in the room's attention, the way a congregation turns its collective gaze without any individual appearing to move. She had learned, in the 18 months since Bath had become her residence rather than her retreat, to read that particular quality of silence. It meant someone of consequence had entered. The Earl of Chetford was not what she had expected from an earl. She had expected the particular self-possession of a man who had never needed to develop it, the ease of someone born to rooms adjusting themselves around him. What she saw, instead, was a man who held himself with the discipline of someone who had learned to take up exactly the space required. No more, no less. He was perhaps 34, broad in the shoulders in the way of someone who had carried things that were not metaphorical, and he wore his dark coat with the slightly spare precision of a man more accustomed to a uniform. There was a faint line along his left jaw that the bath light caught at an angle, and his eyes, when they moved across the room, did not perform their movement for anyone watching. They moved across Cecily, and stopped. She looked away first. She always looked away first. It was a reflex she had cultivated with some care, the looking away, the small contraction that said, "I am not here. I am not worth the complication of noticing me. I had already decided I was furniture before you confirmed it." Beside her, a matron in violet silk leaned toward her companion and said, at the specific volume of a woman who wishes to be overheard by someone nearby and claims innocence of it, "Is that not the divorced wife?" I did not think they let her in. Cecily's chin remained level. Her hands, in their darned gloves, remained still at her sides. She had become, in 18 months, very accomplished at remaining still. She had been given much opportunity to practice. The Earl of Chetford's eyes had moved on. She was certain of it. She did not look back to confirm. She had come to the pump room that morning because Miss Dorothea Hartwell, her mother's unmarried sister, with whom she shared a modest set of rooms in Trim Street, had asked her to collect a small parcel of sheet music left at the subscription counter. Nothing more. Cecily was not here for the assemblies, not here for the season, not here for any of the purposes the pump room had been designed to serve. She was here because Dorothea had a light cold and preferred not to go out before noon, and because Cecily had not yet learned how to refuse Dorothea anything without feeling she was refusing the last warmth in a drafty house. She collected the parcel, she kept her eyes at the middle distance that announced she was going somewhere, and not available for the small cruelties of the assembled room. She was almost at the door when she heard a child's voice, clear and unaffected, say, "Is that lady a princess?" She stopped without meaning to. The voice belonged to a small girl of perhaps 8 years, in a brown wool coat and a bonnet that had been chosen by someone who understood function before ornament. The child was looking directly at Cecily, with the frank assessment of someone who has not yet been taught the social cost of curiosity. Beside the child, a nursemaid had gone the particular red of someone whose charge has said precisely the wrong thing in a public room. Cecily crouched, which was not a thing that dignified women in assembly rooms generally did, and said quietly, "I am afraid not. I am only a woman with a parcel of music." "That is a very good answer," the child said with the approval of someone accustomed to evaluating answers. "My guardian says that most people answer questions by asking a different one." "Your guardian is perceptive," Cecily said. She straightened. She looked up and found the Earl of Chetford standing 4 feet away, watching. He had, she realized, been watching since the moment she crouched. He did not look away when her eyes met his. He had not apparently cultivated the reflex she had spent 18 months developing. There was something in his expression she did not quite have a category for. Not pity. Not the particular horrified solicitude of a man recognizing a woman the room has declared ruined. Something quieter than that, and more specific. She nodded once, the small contained nod she had invented for situations that required acknowledgement without invitation, and went out into the thin autumn sun of Bath. She did not permit herself to wonder what it meant. She had learned not to. Milsom Street in the mornings smelled of bread from the bakery at the corner, and cold stone from the night before, and Cecily had come to find this particular combination among the more reliable pleasures of her reduced life. She had been a woman of means once. She had been a woman with a house in Hertfordshire, and a carriage that was her own, and a quarterly allowance that did not require her to calculate whether a new pair of gloves was an extravagance or a necessity. She had been a wife. She was no longer any of those things, excepting a woman. The parliamentary divorce had cost Sir Edmund Marsden 6 months, a great deal of money, and very nearly his credit. It had cost Cecily rather more. She did not think about the calculation often, because it was not a calculation that admitted of useful conclusions. The marriage had not been a love match in the way that phrase is usually meant. Edmund had been charming at first, and then charming in a different direction, and then not charming at all, and then gone, and in the going had taken the public apparatus of her life with him. She had been 24 years old when the divorce was granted. She would be 27 in March. The lending library on Milsom Street was called Hartley & Sons, though old Mr. E. Hartley had died 3 years prior, and the sons had less talent for literature than their father had hoped. Cecily had come to an arrangement with the younger of the 2 Hartley sons, whereby she copy-edited and transcribed manuscripts that arrived for the circulating collection, correcting errors of punctuation and occasionally grammar, and, in return, received a small wage, the use of the library's considerable collection, and the unspoken dignity of having a reason to be somewhere in the mornings. She had not told Dorothea the full arrangement. Dorothea knew about the library. She did not know about the wage, because knowing about the wage would require Dorothea to acknowledge that Cecily needed one, and Dorothea had managed, across 58 years of single life on a small but independent income, to perfect the art of protecting people she loved from knowledge that would pain them. Cecily sat at the small table in the back room that was her working place, and unfolded the current manuscript, a memoir by a retired naval officer that was factually detailed and stylistically catastrophic, and began to work. The morning passed in the particular quiet that is not silence but is better than silence, the scratch of her pen, the rustle from the front room, the occasional bell above the door announcing a patron. She was perhaps an hour into the naval officer's account of Trafalgar when she opened the lid of her glove box for a fresh nib and found folded in the corner behind the gloves themselves the small square of paper she always kept there. She did not open it. She did not need to open it. She knew what it contained. A pressed violet, dry as an old thought, and in her father's handwriting, so small it fit on the paper's interior fold, the words he had sent her 3 weeks after the divorce was granted and 6 weeks before his death. You are always sufficient. She had not believed it when he wrote it. She was not entirely certain she believed it now. She kept it because the alternative was to have nowhere to put it. The bell above the front door rang. She refolded the paper and set it aside, and reached for the manuscript, and did not think about the pump room. She almost managed it. The parcel arrived at the circus on a Thursday, which was not a day Cecily generally made deliveries, but young Mr. Hartley had put his shoulder out, and the errand boy had a cough, and Cecily had been the only one present when the Earl of Chetford's man of business sent around to say the manuscript of Sergeant Fellow's memoir was expected before Friday. And where was it? She had wrapped it herself in brown paper, she noted, with the particular neatness of someone who does everything they can control with precision, and walked the length of Milsom Street and up through the old city toward the circus. The house at number 14 was hired for the season. She knew from the order book the Earl of Chetford had come to Bath for legal matters pertaining to a ward's estate, and had taken the house on a quarterly basis, which suggested the legal matters were expected to be complicated. She knew this because Mr. Hartley told her most things about their subscribers without being asked, in the same way that a kettle boiling tells you the water is hot. She knocked. A footman admitted her and asked her to wait in the entrance hall, and she stood with the parcel under her arm and looked at nothing in particular, and was very politely not looking at the portrait above the staircase, when the Earl of Chetford appeared in the doorway to the left and said, "You are from Hartley's?" I expected the errand boy. His voice was lower than she had expected. Level. Not unkind. "The errand boy has a cough," Cecily said. "I am Miss Hartwell's niece." "Mrs. Cecily Marsden. I transcribe for Mr. Hartley." She paused. "I have brought Sergeant Fellow's memoir." Something shifted in his expression. She had seen that shift before, in other rooms, on other faces. It was the recalibration of a man who had placed her in one category and now required a different one. The difference, she noted, was that on the Earl of Chetford's face it was accompanied by something that looked, without quite being like regret. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I spoke as though you were a tradesperson's assistant." "I am more or less at this moment," Cecily said. "The distinction is polite rather than substantive." He looked at her for a moment with the particular attention of a man encountering a sentence he had not expected. "Come in," he said, and held the door open. "My ward has been asking after the memoir since I mentioned it. She will be very relieved to know it has arrived." She did not go in. She had not gone into unfamiliar houses with single men since her circumstances became what they were, because she could not afford the added complexity of any impression that might attach itself to her and be used. At that moment, from somewhere upstairs, there came the voice of a child she recognized, bright and unguarded. "Is that the lady from the pump room?" With the good answer, the Earl of Chetford's face did something she could not quite name. He looked up at the landing, and then back at her, and there was something almost rueful in the line of his mouth. "She does not forget faces," he said. "Apparently not," Cecily said. She went in. Georgiana Pelham was discovered on the landing in her nightgown, which the nursemaid behind her indicated was not an approved state. She had a slight fever that had been pronounced not serious, but had kept her inside for 3 days, which she described as a catastrophe of the first order. She had dark eyes, and her father's dark hair, or so the Earl said, with the brief interior glance of a man who keeps grief organized in a separate room and opens that door sparingly. Captain Pelham had died at Badajoz. The Earl said in the same level voice with which he had apologized for the error in the entrance hall. He had been there. He had not, he said, been close enough, though what enough meant in that sentence he did not elaborate. Cecily stayed 40 minutes. She did not mean to stay 40 minutes. She had meant to deliver the parcel, accept the payment receipt, and return to Milsom Street before the rain that had been threatening since morning arrived. Georgiana had looked at her from the landing with the unambiguous request of a child who has been inside for 3 days and seen no new faces, and Cecily had been, in some previous life, a woman who read aloud to people who needed it. She read the first chapter of a volume of natural history that Georgiana had selected from the Earl's temporary library, with the air of someone who has exhausted all other options. The Earl stood in the doorway for perhaps 10 minutes, and Cecily was aware of this in the specific way she was aware of warmth on her left side without turning toward it. She kept her eyes on the page. She read with the slight exaggeration of register that children prefer giving different voices to the naturalist, and to the hawk he was observing, which made Georgiana laugh once and then cover the laugh with a careful hand. When Cecily closed the book and said she must go before the rain, the Earl said, "Come again, if you are willing. She will sleep better for it." He said this in the voice. He had the level declarative voice that offered no room for the ambiguity of a request. It was not a command. It was not precisely an invitation. It was a fact he was reporting. "I can come Friday," Cecily said. He nodded once. He did not thank her. He did not explain why he hadn't thanked her. She found walking home in the first drops of the rain she had been watching for all morning that she was not certain she would have preferred it if he had. She came on Friday. She came the following Tuesday because Georgiana sent a note, written in the careful round hand of a child who has been taught well and knows it, saying she had found a chapter on the migration of swallows that she believed would interest Miss Marsden if Miss Marsden were ever to find herself in the vicinity of the circus again. The Earl was not always present. When he was, he occupied the doorway or a chair near the fire with his newspaper, and did not intrude on the reading, except once when Georgiana asked him a question about hawks, and he answered it with 3 sentences of such precise factual content that Georgiana looked at Cecily with the expression of someone making a mental note. When he was not present, Cecily noticed it in the way she noticed weather. As a change in the quality of a room she had not known she was measuring. It was on the 3rd Tuesday, a gray morning, with frost on the window glass and Georgiana asleep after half a chapter, that the Earl set down his newspaper and said, without preamble, "You are very calm with her." "She is very easy to be calm with," Cecily said. "Most people are nervous. They watch me to see how to respond to her, and then perform accordingly." He paused. "You do not watch me." She considered this. She said, "I did not know. I was expected to." "You are not," he said. "That is what I meant." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the frost was beginning to dissolve in the morning light, running in thin lines down the glass. He said, not looking at her, but at the fire, "I have been in Bath for 3 weeks. I find I dislike it." Less than I expected. It was not by any available measure a declaration of anything. She understood this completely. She stored it nonetheless in the place she kept things she had not yet decided what to do with. The same place she kept the pressed violet, and the sound of her father's handwriting, and the specific quality of stillness in the Earl of Chetford's face when he had looked at her in the pump room and not looked away. The autumn light settled around the room. Georgiana's breathing slowed to the full ease of sleep. Cecily did not watch him. She was very careful not to watch him. She was, as it happened, listening to every sound he made. It was on a Thursday, in November, 3 weeks into the reading arrangement, that the Earl of Chetford said something that cost him something to say. They were in the small sitting room at the front of the house, Georgiana having been taken by the nursemaid for a walk in the weak afternoon sun, and Cecily had remained to discuss with him the natural history volume, which Georgiana wished to keep, and which needed to be purchased from the circulating library's copy rather than borrowed. She had been calculating the price and writing it in her notebook when he said, without the preparation a person usually applies to difficult sentences, "I knew a woman once who made decisions the way you carry yourself." She looked up. He was looking at the middle distance, which she had come to understand was his method of saying things he needed to say but did not wish to be seen saying. "She was to have been my wife," he said. "I was in Portugal. I wrote letters that were, I understand in retrospect, less expressive than the situation required. She married a man with better land, and no intention of dying in a foreign country." He paused. "I decided after that women assess correctly, and choose accordingly. That sentiment is the more reliable currency." Cecily set her pencil down. "That is a very tidy conclusion," she said, "and also completely wrong." He looked at her then, which was, she thought, what he had been hoping she would make necessary. "What would you say instead?" he said. "I would say," Cecily replied, "that we choose under the conditions we have been given. Some of us choose poorly. Some of us choose well and are overruled by circumstances and told afterward that the choice was the failure." She paused. Her voice was level. She had made it level on purpose. "I was not cold. I was not insufficient. I was married to a man who wanted a different life. And when he acquired it, he called the wanting my deficiency rather than his own. I believed him for a time. That was my error, not my character." She had not said this aloud before to anyone except Dorothea, and even to Dorothea she had said, "Only half of it." He was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the grate made its small sounds. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. "No," he said at last, and his voice had changed register in a way she was not prepared for, the level discipline of it gone down one tone to something raw. "I can see that it was not." She reached for her notebook, and found that her hand had knocked her glove box sideways, and a small square of folded paper had fallen to the floor between them. She reached for it too quickly, and he reached for it at the same moment, and for one brief interval their hands were at the same height above the floor, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his without contact. He drew back. She picked up the paper. She did not open it, but she held it in her palm a moment, the way one holds a thing that is both small and necessary. "A letter," he said, not prying, simply acknowledging that something had weight. "From my father," she said, "after the divorce was granted before he died. He did not say he was sorry. He did not offer the practiced condolence of a man filling a social space. He only looked at her, the fire's light on the left side of his face and the scar along his jaw, and said nothing, which was the correct response, and also one she had not expected from anyone." She put the paper back in the glove box. She thought walking home that evening that she ought to be more careful. The thought arrived with its usual companions, the arithmetic of her position, the currency of her reputation, the number of people whose opinion of her could be reduced without her consent and without her ability to correct it. She thought of all this sensibly and deliberately. Then she thought of him saying, "No," and the register his voice had dropped into, and she was considerably less sensible for the rest of the walk. If Cecily had imagined, in the first weeks of the reading arrangement, that the autumn might allow its small, quiet pleasures to accumulate without complication, November's second week corrected her. It did so with the efficiency of a mechanism that has been building pressure in a closed room, and finally finds a seam. Lady Marvell held court at the upper assembly rooms on the Tuesday evening with the authority of a woman who has never been uncertain of her own position, a fan of ivory and pale green silk, held at the measured height that communicated ease with the precision of a signal. She had beside her, as she always had beside her, the women who had decided that agreement with Lady Marvell was a kind of social insurance, and she had, on this particular Tuesday, a new acquisition. Vivian Marsden wore the Linfield diamond earrings, which Cecily recognized without any particular feeling, except a mild and distant curiosity about whether they had been cleaned. They suited Vivian very well. Vivian was the kind of beautiful that the diamonds amplified rather than supported, the kind that had been assembled over years by confident expectation and had settled into a bearing so assured it barely required effort. She stood at Lady Marvell's right hand and surveyed the assembly room with the composure of a woman who has recently confirmed her position and is now allowing the position to be seen. Cecily was present because Dorothea had a standing subscription to the Tuesday assemblies, and Dorothea had a cold, and had insisted, with the particular insistence of a woman who will not be nursed when she can be useful, that Cecily go in her place and collect the subscription book to renew for the following quarter. Cecily had not wanted to come. She had come. She was crossing the room toward the subscription table when she heard Lady Marvell say to the woman beside her, just past the carrying distance of someone not intended to hear, "She was always a cold little thing, the divorced wife." Edmund did what any man of feeling would. The woman beside Lady Marvell laughed, the social laugh that acknowledges rather than finds funny. Vivian Marsden's eyes found Cecily across the room. Cecily had expected, had she ever contemplated this precise scenario, to feel something sharp and burning. What she felt instead was a kind of geological stillness, as though she had been compressed over time into something harder than stone, without the stone's brittleness. She met Vivian's eyes for 3 seconds. Neither of them spoke. Vivian's gaze dropped first. Cecily continued toward the subscription table. She was almost there when she felt the room shift again, the congregation movement, and looked up to find the Earl of Chetford had entered from the far door. He had not seen her yet. He had come, she understood from the presence of Mr. Aldous Pemberton at his elbow, for the legal meeting that had apparently been scheduled for the library anteroom. He looked like what he was, a man who had arrived for a purpose and intended to accomplish it. Then he saw her. He did not stop walking. He did not give any indication to Mr. Pemberton that something had changed. Across the length of the assembly room floor, for exactly the duration of 2 steps, his eyes found hers and stayed. and then the room intervened. Lady Marvell, who had marked the Earl's arrival with the attention she gave to any unattached man of title, made a small gesturing motion to Vivienne. And Vivienne moved, and the room's geometry rearranged itself so that Lady Marvell and Vivienne were now between Cecily and the Earl. And Lady Marvell was addressing the Earl with the practiced warmth of a woman consolidating position, and Cecily was at the subscription table with the book in her hands and her back to all of it. She did not turn around. She collected the subscription book. She signed the renewal. She walked out of the assembly room with the same measured step with which she had entered, and she did not look for him on her way out. And she told herself this was the correct and only sensible choice, and she was almost certain she was right. Near the door she passed within 5 feet of Sir Edmund Marsden. She had not known he was in Bath. She had not been warned. He was standing with 2 men she did not recognize, a glass in his hand, and he looked smaller than she remembered him, not in height, but in the particular quality of a man who has been expanded by confidence and is now living in the extra space. When he saw her, something moved behind his eyes, something that might, on another man's face, have been shame. He did not speak. He looked away. She went out into the cold of the street and stood in the dark for 3 breaths, and was, for those 3 breaths, entirely the woman she had been at 24, still raw from the thing that could not be undone, still uncertain whether she would harden or dissolve. Then the 3 breaths were done, and she walked home. She was the woman she had made herself since then, which was, she had come to suspect considerably more than the one she had been before. 3 days passed without word from the circus. She had not expected word. She was not owed word. She understood the arithmetic of the situation precisely. The Earl's obligations, his ward's estate, the legal complications that had brought him to Bath in the first place. She understood all of it, with the part of herself that had spent 18 months becoming competent at understanding difficult things. She also, in the separate part of herself that was less reliable and more honest, listened for the bell above the library door. On the second day, Dorothea came home from the dressmaker in Stall Street, with the particular expression she wore when she was carrying news that pained her, and had not yet decided how much to mitigate it. She set down her bonnet and her parcels and said, in the voice of someone reading from a document, "Mrs. Prescott at the dressmaker's says they are talking in Milson Street. The divorced wife has been seen walking with the Earl of Chetford, and that it reflects poorly on him." Cecily had been correcting a passage about migratory geese. She set her pencil down. "On him," she said. "Not a question on him," Dorothea confirmed. "I am very sorry, Cecily." "Do not be," Cecily said, and meant it, and almost believed it. On the 3rd evening she opened the small writing desk and took out a sheet of paper and wrote, in her very neat hand, a letter of inquiry to a household in Yorkshire, whose advertisement for a governess had appeared in the Bath Chronicle the previous week. She described herself as a woman of education, some years' experience in domestic management, and steady temperament. She did not describe herself as a divorced woman, because the advertisement had not asked, and the truth would arrive soon enough. She sealed it. She did not immediately post it. She placed it on the corner of the desk. She took her father's letter from the glove box and opened it, this time, and read the 4 words she already knew, and sat for a long while with them. "In the lamplight, you were always sufficient." She wished she knew with certainty whether to believe him. She placed the letter back in its fold. She did not post the letter to Yorkshire that night. She did not remove it from the desk either. The upper assembly rooms on the following Tuesday were fuller than usual, because a visiting party from Bristol had arrived, and because the weather had turned the streets cold enough to drive even the reluctant indoors. Cecily was not there. Dorothea was not there. Neither of them had intended to be there. It was Mr. Mitstair, Aldous Pemberton, who changed this in the particular way that solicitors change things, which is to say by presenting a set of facts so arranged that attending became the least complicated option. He had called at Trim Street that morning with a letter from the Earl of Chetford, and a short verbal addendum that the Earl had asked him to convey. The letter stated, In the level declarative prose she recognized as the Earl's thinking made visible that the matter of Miss Georgiana Pelham's inheritance was to be heard formally before a panel of senior members of the Bath legal community that evening at the Upper Assembly Room's library anteroom, and that Lady Marvell's challenge would be addressed in full, and that Mr. Pemberton would appreciate the presence of anyone who had interacted with Georgiana in a substantive capacity and could speak to her current welfare and residence. The verbal addendum which Mr. Pemberton delivered with the studied neutrality of a man who has been asked to carry something slightly outside his professional remit. His lordship asked me to say that he is sorry for the 3 days' silence, and that the silence was cowardice of a specific kind he has decided he cannot afford any longer. Dorothea, who had been sitting very still during this recitation, said, "Cecily." "I heard," Cecily said. She looked at the letter to Yorkshire, still sealed, still in the corner of the desk. She put on her good gown, which was the grey silk Dorothea had insisted on buying for her in September, and which she had not yet worn because there had not been an occasion requiring it. She put on her white gloves, the pair without darning. She put the pressed violet in her glove-box, which she took with her as she always did. She and Dorothea walked to the upper assembly rooms in the cold evening air, arriving at 7:30. The anteroom proceedings had been underway for perhaps 20 minutes when Lady Marvell's legal argument collapsed. Mr. Prodder. Pemberton, it transpired, had been very thorough. The terms of Captain Pelham's will were unambiguous. The trust established for Georgiana was held by 2 named trustees, of whom the Earl of Chetford was one and a gentleman in London was the other. Lady Marvell's claim rested on a letter of intent she asserted Captain Pelham had written to her husband, expressing a wish to alter the trust, a letter that, upon examination, proved to be in a hand that could not be verified as Captain Pelham's, and bore a date on which Captain Pelham had been demonstrably occupied elsewhere. Mr. Pemberton said all of this in the same voice he used for everything, which was the voice of a man describing weather. Lady Marvell's fan stilled for the first time in Cecily's experience. And then Mr. Meld. Pemberton said in the same weather-describing voice that he had one further matter to place before the assembled company, which was that the Linfield estate of Sir Edmund, Baronet of Linfield, had been made the subject of a creditor's notice the previous fortnight, and that the mortgage instruments held against it had been called in by 2 separate lending houses, and that the Bath Chronicle would be carrying this information in tomorrow's edition. The room was very quiet. Vivian was seated 3 chairs from Lady Marvell. She had arrived with the composure she always brought to public rooms. She did not have it now. Her face, under the diamond earrings that would need to go to the jeweler's very soon, had the expression of a woman recalculating at speed. Sir Edmund was not present. Sir Edmund, Cecily would later learn, had left Bath that morning. Lady Marvell looked for the first time in Cecily's acquaintance like a woman who has played a losing hand. Cecily was standing near the back of the anteroom. She was not thinking about any of this. She was thinking about the letter on the desk at Trim Street, and whether she would post it in the morning, and whether she would be honest with herself about why she was asking the question. Then the Earl of Chetford crossed the room. He did not move quickly. He moved with the particular economy of a man who has decided what he is going to do and is doing it without any theatrical augmentation. The room's attention moved with him, the way attention always moves with someone who does not perform for it. And by the time he reached the edge of the room where Cecily stood with Dorothea, every face in that room had done the calculation. He did not look at the room. He looked at Cecily for one moment, and in that moment his face was entirely without the level discipline she had come to know as its working state. He looked, she thought, like a man who has been cold for a very long time and has stopped arguing with the room that contains the fire. Then he turned to Dorothea. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "your niece will do me the honor of accepting me." 12 words. Not poetic, not abstract. Specific, irrevocable, procedurally. Sound, spoken to the right person in the right room, with every witness the occasion required. Dorothea's breath was audible. Cecily said quietly and without hesitation, "Miss Hartwell will tell you that her niece is capable of answering for herself." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the ancestor of one. "Miss Hartwell," he said, looking at Cecily now, her full name which he had never used before, "will you answer for yourself?" She looked at him. The fire's light was on his left jaw. The room was very still. She thought of the letter on the desk. She thought of her father's 4 words in their paper fold. She thought of the pump room, and his eyes that had not looked away, and 3 days' silence that had been cowardice of a specific kind. He had decided he could not afford any longer. "Yes," she said. "I will." Lady Marvell did not fragment into pieces. She did not weep, or remonstrate, or produce any of the entertainments a crueler story would have scheduled for her. She collected her fan from her lap, stood and left the anteroom with the bearing of a woman who has been corrected in public and will spend the next several weeks revising her understanding of a situation she had simplified beyond recognition. This was not triumph. It was not meant to be. It was only the sound a mechanism makes when it meets a thing it cannot measure and gives way. Vivian left shortly after, the diamond earrings catching the candlelight one last time at the door. She was not a villain either. She was a woman who had been promised a life and received its accounting instead, and in the arithmetic of that reckoning there was a kind of rough justice that required no narrator to amplify it. She would find her footing. People generally do, once they understand the ground they are standing on. Mr. Furr. Pemberton closed his document case and departed with the quiet satisfaction of a solicitor who has done his job correctly and does not require an audience for the feeling. The room recovered itself, in the way that rooms do, gradually and with the slight self-consciousness of a crowd that has witnessed something and is not yet certain what to say about it. Several people said nothing, which was, Cecily thought, the most gracious response available. 1 or 2 women nodded at her. A man, she did not recognize, shook the Earl's hand, with the particular grip of someone confirming a transaction he approves of. Dorothea said in the tone she reserved for occasions, she had anticipated and was pleased to see arrive on schedule, "I believe I shall go home and put the kettle on." She went. "Was?" A week later, the house in the circus had a fire laid in the sitting room at 4 o'clock, and Georgiana was asleep upstairs after her evening lessons, and the frost was back at the windows in the early dark of November. Cecily sat in the chair that had become, over the weeks, the chair she always occupied, and the Earl sat across from her in his, and the room held its small domesticities around them with the ease of a thing that has been practiced. He said, "I should have said it properly." She had known this was coming. She had known it in the way, weather, before the weather knows itself, in some atmospheric change in the quality of the air. The assembly room was correct enough, she said. It was efficient, he said. You deserve something more than efficiency. She looked at him. The fire was between them, and his face in the firelight was the face she had been learning, the scar along the jaw, the eyes that did not move to spare himself the difficulty of looking. She had been afraid of this face, at some point, early in their acquaintance, not because it was harsh, but because she had not trusted herself to read it without error, and she had made so many costly errors. She no longer thought she was reading it wrong. "Cecily," he said, and it was the first time her given name had lived in his voice, and it landed in the room, the way a thing does when it has traveled a long distance to arrive. "I am not an easy man. I am aware of this. I have organized myself for a long time around the conviction that certain things were true, and you have made several of those convictions entirely untenable. And I find I am grateful for it in a way I do not yet have the correct words for." She said, "You are doing tolerably well without them." He crossed the 3 feet between their chairs and crouched before her, which was not a thing that a man of his rank and his particular bodily economy was accustomed to doing, and she understood from the effort of it something she had not needed him to say. "Sturt, will you marry me?" He said, "Not efficiently," as a question, and for the reason that I cannot imagine the following year without you in it, and the year after that, and every year I am given after those, and because I believe you are the most quietly courageous person I have encountered, and I am very tired of not saying so." She opened her glove box. She took out the small fold of paper and held it for a moment, the dry, pressed violet inside it, the 4 words she had been deciding whether to believe for 18 months. She set it on the table beside the chair. "Yes," she said, "as a question, and for reasons I will tell you, over a very long time." He took her hand. Not with urgency, not with the consuming grip of a novel's gesture, but with the steady, deliberate pressure of a man holding something he intends to hold carefully, which was, she thought, the correct kind. Dorothea sent a note the next morning that contained a single word. Finally, Cecily laughed when she read it. She had not laughed like that in a long time, from the easy place. The place that is not performing any function except the simple one. She folded the note and put it next to her father's letter in the glove box. The 2 pieces of paper that meant she had been seen, each from a different direction, each saying the same true thing. Outside the window of the house, at the circus, which was, for the moment, a house, she had some small reason to call connected to her own life. The first snow of November was falling on the old gray stone of Bath, and Georgiana was upstairs asking the nursemaid whether snow changed the migration patterns of swallows. And the fire had been laid early and was very warm. Cecily stood at the window and watched the snow fall for a while, and did not post the letter to Yorkshire, and thought of nothing in particular, which is the specific texture of contentment, the thing that does not announce itself, but arrives without sound in a room where all the doors are finally and quietly closed.